I didn't like social media at the beginning because I didn't know the value of it.
Welcome to the Workhorse Podcast, where we dig deep into the grit, passion, and strategy behind building a successful rural business. We're your hosts.
I'm Kendall Ballantyne, owner of Central Park Farms and marketing for farmers.
And I'm Jessica Garza, owner of Moose Valley Ranch and founder of Market in the Mountains.
This podcast is for hardworking female farmers and rural entrepreneurs who are ready to turn their dreams into thriving businesses. From deep diving business strategies that actually work to balancing farm family life and everything in between.
We're here to give you practical tools, candid insights, and a healthy dose of community support. If you're looking for women who actually cheer you on, are willing to tell you the hard truths, and that understand how much it can throw off your day when the cows get out, you're in the right spot.
This podcast is for the doers, the women who don't stay in one spot for too long, for the workhorses. A couple episodes ago, we did a husband hot seat, and Jess invited her husband on to talk all about what it's like to run a business with your spouse. And today I am so excited to be welcoming my husband, Jay, onto the podcast for his first ever podcast episode, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, you've never been on a podcast before.
Never been.
He has been on a TV show, though, before from one of his other companies.
Oh, yeah.
Like, he's not new to the world. He's just new to podcasting. But that's because you don't really listen to podcasts, do you?
No, the weird thing is I think I'm more nervous about this than being on a fishing TV show.
Really?
Yep.
Really? And that's surprising because we do a lot of Instagram lives and stuff together.
I know, but I think there's more expectations.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
So for those of you who don't know Jay, if you don't follow the farm, I'd love, Jay, for you to just kind of let us know how you got into agriculture in the first place.
Oh, geez. How'd I get into it?
Yeah.
Well, pretty straightforward. I'm a fifth generation, I guess. Yeah, fifth generation farmer. My great-great-grandpa was back in Holland doing duck farming. My grandpa was a duck and then changed over into a chicken farmer in Holland. And then they came over here in Canada a little bit past World War II, and they started a chicken farm here. My father followed suit to that. And then I followed suit with my father, I guess. Yeah. And when I was in grade 11.
Yeah. So your dad used to raise birds, and correct me if I'm wrong. Your dad used to raise birds for KFC? Is that correct? Yeah.
So originally they had a broiler quota, which is how our stuff is covered here. They would grow a bird called a junior. And a junior was basically a little over a 2-pound processed bird, and those were cut up into 9 pieces for Kentucky Fried Chicken at the beginning was the major buyer of poultry.
Okay, and then correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah. It's been a while. So then you initially got into doing your quail business. So Jay ended up doing quail, not broilers. And am I right in saying that was like a career and personal planning class in high school?
No.
That caused that?
In elementary.
Okay.
Grade 6, I had this great teacher, Mr. McMahon. He came up and he said, you know what? I want everybody to kind of do a business plan of something that you would do in your future that you're kind of interested in. And I don't know if I was super interested in what, I ended up doing, but it was what I knew.
Yeah.
And being in grade 6 or something, it's hard to figure out what you really want to do. Like, at that time, it's not like you're thinking about being an auto mechanic or you're not thinking about being a helicopter. Well, although that was one of my plans. So then I wrote up a business plan as well as I could. It was a business plan on quail.
Yeah. Okay.
And so we went ahead and by fluke, my parents, for I believe a birthday present or Christmas present, came home with some quail for me after I did this business report. So I ended up having like 7 or 8 quail. I had them in a pen upstairs in one of my parents' old barns, and we used to take the eggs, and I had taken them down to Vanderveen's to see, Vanderpool's eggs, to see if they could pickle them for me, and that. It took almost 3 or 4 years until grade 11 when I actually started my first company called Specialty Quail Products, and I started to commercially grow these for eggs to start off with.
Okay, do you know what I think is so interesting about that is you say like in grade 6, like nobody ever thinks of being an auto mechanic or a helicopter pilot or anything. That feels like such a multi-generational farmer answer because I'm a first generation farmer. So I'm like, what? Yeah, actually like lots of kids at that age, but you just would have been so ingrained in agriculture that thinking of what you wanted to be was always in the sphere of agriculture.
Well, I think that's what happens though with farming families is that you don't know any better.
Yeah.
And when they say, "Oh, farming's a way of life," or "farming's in your blood," I'm a total firm believer of that.
Yeah.
Because at one time we broke out to go do a fishing lodge, and don't get me wrong, it's what I love to do and everything. But once it became a job, and you had being a fishing lodge owner, manager, guide, or you had farming, well, I ended up coming back to farming.
Yeah. So for those who don't know your entire story, I know we share it a lot of the time with Central Park Farms. Can you explain to people, like, what was the scope of the quail farm at the end? So you kind of launched your business plan in grade 6 because of a school project. And then mom and dad bought you some quail.
Yeah.
You sent them for doing some pickling eggs, things like that. Grade 11, you're like, okay, I'm going to really do this as a business. You launch into specialty quail products. When you were at your peak in your quail business, how many birds were you doing, or how many eggs were you doing?
Well, we had a meat division that we sold quail for meat, and then we had an egg division of it. So at all times on the farm, we'd have about 250,000 birds. And then we would ship about 28,000 just quail eggs per week out to sushi bars, restaurants, all that, all across Canada. Except for the Maritimes. We're into Toronto and everything around there. We were into New York, California. We're basically, except for the Maritimes and the East Coast, we kind of had everything covered. So we did that, and then we did at peak, we did 43,000 meat birds per week, every week of the year, because they were in such a rotation that you couldn't not place those birds. So it didn't matter if it was Christmas or if you thought you had a holiday, those breeders were always laying eggs. So you had no choice but to set them. So
I think people are always really surprised when I tell them just how big that business was, like as far as like number of birds produced.
Yeah.
And then you retired from agriculture. So all of this happened prior to me meeting you.
Oh, yeah.
When I first met you, I remember, Jay and I have been together for going on 11 years. And I remember when I first met him, I was director of operations for a large transportation company, had absolutely nothing to do with agriculture, had no idea anything about farming. And I remember you brought me on one of our first kind of dates after going for like dinner and stuff like that. You brought me
awesome.
to Home Farm. So Home Farm is Jay's parents' property. So Jay had a farm, his parents had a farm in the same neighborhood, but he was operating still a segment of the business. So they had sold off all of the quail stuff, except he kept one small portion of the business, which was purchasing back quail to process for birds of prey rescue centers. And things like, for example, airports use falcons to get birds of prey and other birds out of the flight paths of planes and things like that. So they use it as a feed source. So they process quail, keep all the feathers and everything intact, and then sell it. And I remember Jay brought me, it was super late at night because Jay, my mother-in-law, has the most beautiful gardens on her, she is like stunning gardens. And Jay brought me to Home Farm, and we just kind of went and walked around and we were talking about things. And I remember you telling me about processing quail, and you took me through the freezer section, and I was like, oh, let me see. And I remember you saying to me, I don't know if you want to see them.
Yeah, that's one way to scare off somebody.
Yeah.
Yeah. Look what I do for a living. Whoa,
yeah, and just like bags of processed birds. So that, but then I got you to show me, and I didn't get scared off.
No, you were always game for.
But you didn't know that, because like when we met, I was very corporate. I was much more.
There was a lot of high heels.
A lot of high heels, a lot of power suits.
A lot of power suits, a lot of very nicely put together.
Yes. Yeah. Very different career. So when I first, as anybody knows, when they jump into a new relationship, you just like want to learn everything about the other person. And I remember you telling me all about your past life as far. Well, you do, right? You get excited to like learn about the other person and what definitely. They were all about. So, so much of what you are and your family is agriculture, even though you weren't farming anymore. At that point, you were fishing lodge, you had rentals. Yeah. You've always only been an entrepreneur. You've never worked for anybody except for working for your dad when you were young. Yeah. You've never had an outside job.
No. I painted fences when I was
for somebody else?
Yeah, in grade 5 or something. It was horrible.
So Jay used to get kind of hired out in the community to like build fences, shovel manure, paint fences.
Yeah. But when I was super...
like really young.
Yeah.
Like you couldn't even do that anymore. Like...
Because that was a problem when I was like 7. I looked like I was 12.
Yeah.
So the neighbors used to be like, hey, come and dig fence post holes. And I used to,
Yeah, if you are not watching a video clip of this on Instagram, my husband is 6'8". So he is like a very big Dutch farmer. So he looks much, he would have looked much older than he was at that age.
Yeah.
And his brother is 10 years older than him. So you would have felt like you were older. So Jay, from a very young age, has been working throughout the South Langley area for other farmers and things like that. But your entire adult life, you've never worked for it. You've never had a different thing besides entrepreneurship. So I remember when we first started dating, I was really asking you a lot about agriculture.
Yeah.
And at that time, I had a very big disconnect to where my food was coming from.
Yeah, you did.
And remember, I kept bringing you like very greenwashed like marketing stuff. Like I'd be like, look at this chicken. And then you would know exactly where that chicken came from. And not in a negative way, because Jay was a very large-scale commercial farmer, which I think is a great part of the balance between what we do now and your knowledge from what you did then. But what I believed I was buying at the grocery store, you factually knew what I was buying.
Yeah.
And so what ended up happening is one day I brought to you the fact that I wanted to raise chicken.
Yeah.
And what did you say when I brought that to you?
I don't. One of those things where it's like, all right, we're going to raise these.
No. You said no.
Oh, at the beginning, of course. Yeah.
No.
Yeah. Well, that was the thing. I had been out of it. We had sold that business to the killing plant that we were shipping to. And then I went fishing. So, and I believe we got together in 2013 then, right?
Yeah, I'd say so. 2013.
2013. And I had sold that business in 2010, I guess.
Yeah. And then you were doing mini storage and rentals in the fish charter company.
Right. Because we changed all of our barns. We had about 250,000 square feet in barn space, and we changed it all into mini storage.
Yeah.
And then I went fishing. So I was kind of on the west coast of Vancouver Island for 4 months of the main season of the summer.
Yeah. So then I brought to Jay that I really wanted to raise some chickens. And I brought to him that I didn't want to be a farmer though. I only wanted to raise a small number of chickens for our family.
Oh yeah.
And that was like when we first got together.
Oh, and that got the shot. Yeah, that's okay,
and you were like, absolutely not.
Let's not try that.
Yeah, I like wanted, and in my mind, I was like, I'm gonna raise 20 chickens. And then,
impossible.
Yeah, and then there's somebody out there raising 20 chickens right now that's like, that is possible. But for somebody who did 250,000 birds on the farm at one time, 20 chickens is not an option. So I kept bringing it up to you. And then I remember I was at my corporate career one day and you sent me a text message that said, I set you birds. So he finally caved on the idea and he said, as long as you sell enough to offset your costs, you can raise some birds.
Because typically, if you're going to raise like just a few birds, say you have 20 and you have heating and litter, what we talk about, like shavings and stuff, and you have to get some new feed cans and some more Plasson waters and stuff, you end up spending way more on those 20 chickens than if you went and bought a really nice organic or non-GMO chicken from the grocery store or from somebody else. So
yeah, so it was a little bit of a back and forth for a little bit. And then one day, after telling me that he might be on board with the idea as long as I offset my costs by raising some extras to sell to people, I went to work and I got a text message from him.
That's right. Oh, yeah. That's awesome.
I got a text message from him saying, I got you chicks.
And I figure I was going to kill her off right there.
Yeah.
I figure, okay, so what we'll do is we'll have her go to work. And when she comes home, I'll have 500 chickens there for her.
Well, he didn't tell me it was 500 chickens. He just said, I got you chicks. And then I came home and he was like, there are some chicks in the barn for you.
Yeah. So it worked out perfect because I thought after she did this and tried to sell 300 or 400 chickens,
he said a few chicks and I opened that door and there were 500 chicks underneath a heater in the barn.
You got to admit, they're pretty cute though. That's the thing. So
it was great. So Jay thought he would kill me off with the idea that I would hate doing it, that I would never want to be involved with it again. And then I launched an Instagram account because my background was in marketing. So I knew that I had about 7 weeks to sell those birds.
Yeah. That's where it all went downhill for me.
Yeah. What he failed to realize is my marketing background. So I had half of those birds sold before the processing happened. And we were able to move those chickens. But at the time, I was still in my corporate career. So I don't know. Do you remember that I used to call you from work?
Oh, yeah. So you'd have to drop everything on the farm and whatever else, because we still own the farm.
Yeah.
Like we got rid of the business, but we still had the 224th farm.
And there was like residential rentals and stuff like that on it. Like there was still other things going on the property that was taking Jay's time with his business.
Yeah, we definitely pivoted into rentals on that. So you'd have to quit everything you do, grab 2 chickens, bring them up to the front. I felt like some type of weird dealer in the
It was like a parking lot drug dealer of 2 chickens.
Yeah. So go up there, hand 2 chickens, but then you'd end up talking because I don't mind talking at all. So you'd end up talking for 45 minutes or an hour to this fella that, you just got $30 off of.
Yeah. So eventually Jay said to me, in my corporate career paid well, and I enjoyed doing it-ish at the beginning. It really went south. We did talk about that in a previous podcast episode. It did go really south. But at the time, like it was a career I had worked really hard for. And
you're very successful.
And I was very successful at it.
For how young you were, because you were only 27. 27. Well, yeah.
I did leave my corporate career fairly fast because at some point Jay said to me.
Nothing to do with me.
Jay said to me, you got to poop or get off the pot because I can't keep meeting people in the driveway. To be able to sell them 2 chickens. So it was just that word of mouth started spreading and people kept calling me and saying like, hey, I heard about you from my neighbor. I had one of your chickens over there. They were really great. So it kind of cascaded for us.
And I think it was a perfect time because like 10 years ago or 12 years ago or whatever that was, it was like a real time that buzzwords were starting to come in. Like, know your farmer, know where your food comes from. And especially with you with a social media background and business background and everything, it was a perfect time to get into that.
Yeah.
Not business. I guess you could say business. Yeah.
And then we decided to I added in 4 hogs. And at that point, you were teaching me how to farm, but I was really like, I started Central Park Farms. I was really doing like all the because you were totally running your own businesses.
Yeah, but never think I was teaching you. It wasn't like I'd take you out there by your hand or anything.
But you were teaching me.
You're a sponge. When it comes to learning stuff, you don't have to tell you too many times.
Yeah, but then there's those things that you, like as a first generation producer who'd never farmed before, there's so much to learn. And there's those things that you instinctively know from just being around it all the time.
And that's definitely, I take it for granted, right?
You do.
That you can look at a bird and be like, it's either too hot or too cold or,
yes.
I get what you're saying.
And that's what I always say to I find that especially when I'm like teaching multi-generational farmers too, a lot of times you guys think that showing up on social media, that it's all boring because you're like, oh, I don't like, nobody cares. People already know this. Like you guys assume that it's easy or understandable or that nobody's interested in it.
Yeah.
Where on the flip side, I knew nothing. And so everything was a lesson and everything was interesting. And even like those things that you don't even think of. Like I remember when you went out of town one time at the very beginning of us raising birds and our brooder kicked out. Yeah. It got clogged up and the brooder kicked out. So for those of you who don't raise chickens, a brooder is the heater that the baby chicks goes under. And that is like a catastrophic problem. Chicks die when they lose their heat like that at that age. And I raced over to, at the time, my boyfriend's dad's farm. And I, went and talked to my now father-in-law. And I knocked on his door and he came to the door and I was like, I don't know what to do ever. Like the birds don't have heat. What do I do? And he just said to me, he's like, just take a filament from a light bulb and you just stick it in there. And I was like, I only have LED light bulbs. And so I remember my father-in-law, also obviously big Dutch farmer. And I remember him putting on his really big gumboots.
Oh, yeah.
And he's like, I'll meet you at the farm. And he put his really big gumboots on. He like went back into the house and he put his really big gumboots on. And then he drove his truck over to the farm. And I remember him like breaking the light bulb and pulling the filament out and unclogging it.
Yeah.
And just in that moment being like, I'm so grateful that there are people to teach me these lessons that you don't when you're just a first generation farmer who has none of that knowledge base that you can tap into, like how beneficial that was for me.
Well, it feels like it's kind of like a lost career, almost like farming. It's like one of these things that the farms that are around are just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And the smaller farmers, are kind of...
Yeah, and as more farms don't necessarily have a succession like that their kids or whatever want to take over the farm, and you're seeing so many new people come into the industry, like I always worry that those little pieces of knowledge will get lost as we get more, especially where we are. Like there's a lot of first generation producers in our area that are kind of coming up, and just that lost knowledge piece from generations. So you always thought that it was like you weren't teaching me, but he was absolutely giving me a lot of guidance. But at that time, Central Park Farms was really a company that I was managing.
Oh, 100%.
And you were just kind of like popping in and helping with some things and giving me some like insight on the actual farming end of things. Running a rural business isn't for the faint of heart. Whether you're growing crops, raising livestock, or building a small town business, you know the challenges and the rewards better than anyone.
That's why we created the Workhorse Collective, a monthly coaching membership designed for rural business owners and farmers who want practical marketing strategies, real community, and results that actually matter. Gain expert guidance and live sessions tailored to your unique challenges. Connect with other driven business owners who share your values. Get professional feedback to fine-tune your marketing and grow your business. Join on your terms with flexible options that fit even the busiest schedules.
This isn't fluff or theory. It's hands-on support from people who live and breathe rural businesses, just like you.
Visit the link in today's show notes to learn more and become part of a community that's working smarter, not harder, to grow thriving rural businesses. The Workhorse Collective, real tools, real results, and real connection.
Because when rural businesses succeed, our communities thrive. But fast forward, as the company got busier, because we definitely got a lot busier, and it became a little bit of a runaway freight train.
Well, I think we got back up a little bit for the diversification of animals, actually.
Oh, yeah.
Because there's a lot to be said.
It escalated really fast.
Yeah, it escalated, but it was one of those things that I'd done a lot of poultry farming, which was fine. Whether it's a duck, a chicken, or a quail, it's all kind of the same idea. But we tried to diversify, and we got our first set of pigs. And that was a tough one.
So then all of a sudden, Jay was the newbie as well. So we ended up getting 4 hogs. And at that time, you were still very uninvolved with the business of Central Park Farms.
Oh, 100%.
We just thought like, I wanted bacon. That's how that started. And then we got 4 hogs. And then Jay had always felt like it would be really cool to have black cattle.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. If you're going to get cattle, you only have to get black cattle.
He wanted some black cattle.
That's
so
it.
anyways, at some point, I went and picked up 8 red heifers, brought them back to the farm. So anyways, it escalated really quickly. I had left my corporate career. I was working at doing farmers markets. We had brought my mom on board. Like, I'm fast forwarding at a pretty extreme. But at some point in the journey, we decided together that you were going to come in and be a really major role in that business.
I think it just came into labor, right? Like we got to a certain point and we're starting to do rounds of chickens, and we're just short on labor and couldn't afford to hire somebody.
Yes.
So by that time, the rentals were already kind of solidified and stuff like that, and our other stuff. And then at that time, I don't think fishing.
You weren't doing fishing anymore.
No.
You had stepped away from fishing.
Yeah. So I think I did about five years of fishing or so.
Yeah.
And then stepped away from that, and then kind of came back to the farm because obviously the rentals and stuff were.
Yeah. And the busier I got with the farm and the more opportunity we could see in that business, the more obvious it was that this just couldn't be me. This had to be us doing that.
Well, you're still at your job too.
By that point, I was done. No, by that point, I was done. Now, I get asked a lot of questions when I go and do speaking engagements from women at the end of presentations that I'm doing. And one of the things that I oftentimes get asked is like, how do we juggle and split up our workload? Because a lot of farmers, first generation farmers that I talk to, they're working full time in the business. Their husband is maybe working off farm, and they're wanting to like have their husband come into the business full time, or they're wanting to start a farm together, what have you. And always the conversation is like, how do you work with your spouse in a way that you're not stepping on each other within the business? Because really, Central Park Farms was something that I managed, and now it's something we manage.
Yeah.
Like, how did you feel coming into Central Park Farms?
Well, yeah.
And you can be honest. This is an honest podcast, so like I want you to tell me.
It was tough, right? Because when you're doing farming, like obviously your net income at the end of the month is very, very low. And I was doing things like rentals, which is a residual income that once you have that renter in there and they're taken care of, you have some maintenance, but it's a residual income. You don't have to really worry about it. Then Kendall was already going ahead and managing and taking care of everything. But then it's kind of one of those things with a couple. It's just, you can't really afford for both of you to be farming all the time. Like you usually, like for the first, like realistically, probably for Central Park Farms for the first like 5 years, we needed that other income from other things.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we did a podcast episode about the benefit of having off-farm income.
Yeah.
And how that's able to like parlay into the business to have growth. But I more mean, like, how did you feel coming in and then co-managing with me? Like, did you sometimes feel like I was stepping on your toes and sometimes feel like how did that feel for you that we had to kind of divide who takes care of what? And how did we kind of figure that out?
Well, shortly after, so I started taking care of animals.
Yeah.
That was straightforward. But then you started taking care of managing. So, and a big part, well, all of your stuff at that time, once I could take over a little bit of that, was to do social media.
Yeah.
And marketing in that respect.
I think you're giving too much credit to how smooth that transit. Like, I think you're giving too much credit and making it sound like that was smoother than it is. I think that there was some annoyance at the beginning where sometimes I would, because I was the one that was taking care of so much of that, I feel like at the beginning, I didn't do a good enough job of not stepping on your toes when you stepped into the company. I feel like we had a little bit of friction at the beginning. I think so.
Yeah.
I think it's so much easier to manage this company together now than at the very beginning.
Oh, definitely. And I think it's like everything. It's like growing pains. Yeah, everybody's got to figure out where they're needed and not needed. And And I think the transition for me out of the actual day-to-day farming and into the administrative management, that capacity, I think that was hard for me. Oh, I would imagine, because then you're just kind of going back to what
I was doing before and didn't want to do anymore when I came to the farm. So I think that it was, and Jay probably forgets. I do. I have a feeling.
I can't remember anything from yesterday.
Yeah. I feel like, and maybe that was just some of it was like internally reflected, is that I felt like when I started transitioning away from doing like actually dealing with the animals, at the time we were farrowing a ton with the pigs. And when I stepped out of that, I feel like maybe there was like a little bit of resentment for me that all of a sudden I was back to doing the desk job and a little bit of like a lost identity of like, now I'm just doing these parts of the company, even though they're really important parts of the company too. Like we can't have one of us without the other, as far as like we have to obviously be producing all the livestock and things like that. But then we also have to have my role within the company.
Oh, I think that's a big topic. Like as far as anything goes with what we're doing, I feel that it's easy to raise animals. Like that's not a problem. Like you can go in there and we can upscale or downscale animals. But the thing that actually keeps this business going is social media, your marketing, because you can tell, like as soon as like say last week or something, you were sick for 7 or 10 days and maybe weren't on social media as much. And you can just see our gross revenue just tank.
Yeah. So I mean, tanking for Jay is not actually tanking. So our revenue was down a bit. Yeah. So like this is not a tanking. But if I don't show up on social media, we do see a decrease. For us, we are growing so fast that if we're not seeing a grow and we're seeing a slight dip, that means tanking to Jay. Yeah, so it's not tanking the way that most people would view tanking.
Yeah, because that scares the hell out of me, because in the past when you work on like an 8% margin on animal agriculture or 10%, if I see numbers that have gone down 10%, it just looks like you're you're not paying bills that month.
No, and I mean that's certainly not the case. So Jay gets, because we have seen growth month after month for the history of this company.
Yeah.
Jay doesn't like to see 10,000 less in sales. So that's like, it's not a tanking situation, but there is a lot to be said about the roles that we both do within the company and how important both roles are. But I think during that initial transition, I feel like there was a little bit more of that, because sometimes I would say something as the person who started Central Park Farms to somebody who's like a 5th generation producer and knows agriculture inside out and backwards. And there would be a little friction in that at the beginning. But once we kind of figured out more clear cut, like these are the roles that you do and these are the roles that I do, it was easier to be able to decide, like, ultimately you get, at the end of the day, get the final call on the things that have to do with the livestock.
Oh, yeah.
You take my opinion into perspective. But once I got out of my head on Central Park Farms being something that, like, I was making all the decisions initially, to both of us are making decisions and who's kind of like the final vote on certain areas.
Yeah, but then you got to look at too, animal agriculture. It's pretty cut and dry. Like when you're saying final decisions, those decisions are, those birds have to be shipped out at 7 or 8 weeks, and those cows have to go out at 24 months or 1,300 pounds, or those pigs have to be, 220 pounds when they leave the farm.
Yeah, so, I mean, you made decisions about scaling, and you made decisions about, like, we stepped away from some things on the farm.
Yeah.
And those ultimately were decisions that obviously you took me into consideration on, but I look to you to make the final call on those things.
Yeah, but scaling does go hand in hand with marketing.
Yeah, for sure. So there's been a lot. And then for me, realizing, like, now fast forward, we have a butcher shop on farm. I make none of the decisions to do with the butcher shop. You very clearly manage certain employees. Other employees are very clearly on, like, the pick and pack farm store side, which is more of the side that I oversee.
Right.
So it's a little bit more clear cut now.
Yeah, it is, for sure.
Which makes it easier. It took a little bit to get to that position, but now that we're there, I feel like it's very easy to manage this company with you now.
Oh,
like from the us two.
Yeah. Oh, no, there's no problems. Like, there's no, and maybe that's what's nice about our company, because there is, not nice about, but that there is such a division.
Yeah.
It's like pick and pack and meat cutting.
Yes.
Or growing animals and marketing.
Mm-hmm.
You can't really cross-contaminate.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can't cross-contaminate our roles with what we do within the company.
Yeah, and understanding that all of our roles are needed and necessary. And now Jay and I have kind of, like, developed our lanes, and we know, like, you call it cross-contaminate, I call it staying in each other's in our own lanes.
Yeah, fair enough.
So then it just kind of makes it so that it works.
Yeah. Oh, and it definitely works, for sure.
And now I, like, fast forward, and we're adding new things to the business, and we're able to really, kind of find our place in it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Occasionally you call me and ask me if I want to come for feeding animals and come and hang out with you, which I always love because it gets me away from my desk. Now, one of the things that I had promised.
Oh, snap.
By the way, Jay did not want to know what the questions were going to be in advance. I asked him if he wanted to, like, chat ahead of time on what we were going to talk about. So he has no idea what we are going to talk about at all.
It would be canned. If
you did that. So this is all on the fly.
Yeah.
So the question I get asked the absolute most when I go and do speaking engagements, it doesn't matter what city I'm in, what country I'm in, is always, how do you get your husband to show up on social media?
Oh, boy. Yeah.
And caveat that with, even if he doesn't want to go online, and ladies, like, you can send this to your husbands and, like, let them listen to this end portion of the podcast coming from Jay. You did not like social media at the beginning.
Holy smoke. Okay. I'm going to say I didn't like social media at the beginning because I didn't know the value of it.
Yes.
So as I'm looking forward and I finally figure out the value of social media, oh boy, I'll let you do whatever. But at the beginning, it was a tough go. So we'd be herding cows into, say, they're going to give birth. And on the old farm, we had all these.
Like, we had, like, a sorting facility where they would get closer to the barn.
Calving pens. Yeah. So I'd be trying to herd these cows in with Kendall, and she'd literally have her phone in one hand. And she'd be like, whoa, wait. But we have all these cows that we're trying to herd. Now I see that, it's Instagram magic, as we would say now, that you're showing people what you're doing on the farm. You're showing them how you get these animals into calving paddocks and everything else. But at the time, I was like, I might as well go hire somebody else because this is like a detriment here.
I like so clearly remember you saying to me, I cannot teach you to farm with you having a phone in your hand.
Yeah.
And I said to you, well, if I don't have a phone in my hand, there's no reason for you to teach me to farm because we won't have a business.
No, that's
and that was, I remember that as like very crystal clear in my mind that Jay really couldn't see how that was important and that I needed to be focusing on what he was trying to show me. And then on the flip side, I was like, well, then don't bother showing me because there will not be a reason for that.
Yeah. And that's something I did not see. And it honestly took me probably 3 years?
Yeah, it took you a bit to grasp that. And I remember so vividly that you came back from the feed store.
Yeah.
I think it was the feed store. You went somewhere and somebody came up to you and said something to you. They knew who you were.
Oh, yeah.
They like recognized you. And then they knew something. Jay had like thrown his back out or something like that, or he had like hurt himself. Anyways, and they knew about that specific thing. And she said that to you at the store.
Well, that's the thing that you'll get. You'll go somewhere and people will reiterate your entire life story to you. Hey, how's this happening? How'd the cows go? Did you, that calf that you had to pull, or those pigs, or your pigs got out? And you're just like, holy smoke.
Yeah.
What is going on?
The first time that happened to you, do you remember how you responded to her?
I actually don't.
I remember because you came home and you were like, I think I might have come across wrong to somebody who recognized me at the store. You said, this is really weird.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
and
yeah,
then
for sure.
I got a direct message. And the person was somebody I knew. I actually knew her from high school and she follows us on Instagram. And so of all the people it could have been, it was like the best person for it to have been. Because Kate's a customer of ours. She's part of Ranch Club. Like she's been with us forever. But it was so funny. She's like, I think I freaked out your husband at the store. I went up to him and like started telling him things. And then he just like looked at me like ghostly and was like, this is so weird. Now you're used to it though.
Yeah. I did deliveries about 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago?
Yeah.
It's downtown Vancouver. I'm in the foyer. And this fella comes up and he looks at me like he's completely starstruck.
Yeah.
He's looking at me. He's like, you're Jay. And I said, yeah, I am. He goes, you're one of the owners of Central Park Farm. And he goes, I have to get a selfie with you.
Yeah.
So anyways, we got a selfie of, each other. And I left with him saying, you have the best beef burgers ever.
I love that. I love that so much. So at the beginning, you were really not pro social media. And I remember at the beginning, you hardly ever showed up on social media.
Yeah, but you gotta I'm 50 years old now.
Yeah.
And so when I was growing up, we didn't even have internet. Like I still remember dial-up internet. And I'm right in that weird kind of age of people where we're not old enough to not know any of that, but I miss the memo.
Yes.
I miss the memo.
I bet you don't remember how you really ended up on social media.
No.
I was getting death threats, remember?
Oh, yeah.
So we farm in a very high animal rights activist area. And I don't want to say it is a very high plant-based vegan community. Like we're near a very big city. And so I don't want to say vegan because that's just a choice of diet. I'm talking about an extremist. Like there's a lot of extremist animal rights activists in our area. So we have a farm just outside of Vancouver, and then we have a ranch in a small town, small community. I'm talking about near our farm.
Yeah.
And I really started gaining a lot of traction on social media. And I want to say that this is not a normal thing. This was a very abnormal thing. We were really direct, like community facing. I was very community facing on social media. But also because of where we're located, this is not unheard of in our area. So this is not something that like, just because you're going to go post yourself on social media, this is going to happen to you. That's not the case. This is just kind of like a unique circumstance to where we're located. And I started to get death threats really aggressively. And the problem is we have a farm store. We had a farm store at the time and we were doing events on our farm and things like that.
Yeah.
So people had our address.
Yeah.
And at the time, the kids were younger.
Yep. For sure.
And that was really concerning for me that we were having these issues. So we had actually reported one of them to the police because he was somebody who was local and was making those threats to me. So we had reported them to the police. And then the police saw Jay And they said, well, you need this guy showing up online more because of his size, because it was always just this 27, 28, 29-year-old showing up on social media. And it was like, I'm, small and it seems easy to attack me online. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden what they didn't realize is there was this like 6'8" guy in the background that was also on the same property. Right. And so it was actually police that made you step forward at the beginning.
Right.
And then he realized that he was an Instagram star.
Ooh, yeah. When you figure out that goes to your head quick.
Yeah. Our customers and our followers on social media absolutely adore Jay. Like I'm thankful that you don't have your own account.
I know.
Because I worry that if you had your own account, that you would get way more followers than me.
Never know.
So you have to be on the farm account only. Right. You can't have like a Jay at Central Park Farms account. So it turned into something that we really realized that when Jay shows up online, first of all, there was just that like safety dynamic for me at the beginning. Mm-hmm. Once that kind of started happening, that died off immediately. Like immediately, I could never have that problem anymore.
Right, which is a positive.
Like it rarely ever do I even get anything like, occasionally you'll hit, the algorithm where people are just rude, but not that kind of scenario that we had then.
Right.
But also, like our female customers adore some Jay on Instagram.
I think it's just because I give away a lot of free stuff.
Yeah, he does sometimes give away free stuff, but it ended up being something that sharing all of the stories of our farm became really important. And we really see an increase in revenue from having, like, even Jagger now as a teenager. We talked about this in a past episode about like keeping your kids safe online. Yep. So I remember when the kids were younger, we didn't always show them online.
No.
Or we were very strategic and careful. Yeah. But now Jagger's like a grown man size at 17.
Yeah.
Like I wouldn't want to mess with Jagger. Mm-hmm. So Jagger shows up online because he wants to, but it really makes a huge impact on our business.
Absolutely. Yeah, because also what I've noticed lately that you've been doing, instead of always just showing the goods, mm-hmm. You guys, if you're farming, there's always bads about it too.
Yeah.
And it's more of a life lesson and showing people what we all go through. So I notice that you show some of the bad as well.
I always try to do the good, the bad, not the ugly.
Yeah. Oh, no.
Yeah. Like you're not going to see me performing like personally, this is a personal choice. You're not going to see me like lancing an issue on a cow because at the end of the day we sell meat. So like I want to keep that portion of it for me. It's not that I can't talk about it happening, but I'm not showing things like that. I'm like strategic about what we're showing, but I find that opening up our family's story, and certainly there's lots of things that happen in our lives that we aren't sharing on social media, but opening up our lives on social media and on Instagram has really, and through our newsletters, has really helped our community connect with us.
Yeah.
And we don't get the same like complaints about pricing or pushback when we do changes. And people just like want to work with us because they feel like they're kind of part of our family.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's why people come in and call you by your, your name and everything. It's not like going to a store where you're disconnected from the people that are in that store.
Yeah. And it's all about deciding like what the comfort level is for your family, I think.
Yeah.
Like how much are you willing? And I do say to you sometimes, oh, can I take a video of this or whatever when it's you?
Yeah.
Sometimes you don't want a video. Not very often, but
usually when it just makes me look incompetent.
Yes.
Like if I'm standing on a 5-gallon bucket trying to screw in a light and I'm like, trying to do the 1 foot thing. I'm not, you know what? Maybe we'll leave that one out of there.
Yeah, I was recording you the other day while you were trying to pull the strings off of that huge bale when you dropped it into the thing and you were using the tractor.
Oh, yeah.
And like something happened and it slipped.
Yeah.
And it just like wasn't your best equipment operating.
But we don't mind. You can be a little bit off from best. But if I look really bad, we're probably going to edit that.
Yeah. Like sometimes you're like, let's try that one again or whatever, just so that it's not,
Yeah, I have my macho looks. So,
you gotta.
There's got to be a standard.
There's got to be a standard.
Yeah.
But you would say your advice is to other husbands or guys to just give it a go on social?
Oh, 100%. I think social media is, honestly, you can always grow an animal, but you can't always be successful on social media. So you got to get out there and you got to put yourself out there in social media. And you have to tell your story. I think that's the biggest thing. Like, it's a bad thing to say, but you can't really hold back because people have to know who you are and they want to support the person, I guess you could say. Like, they want to support you in all this. So
I love that. And I think that wraps it up for us. I know we could talk forever.
God, we could.
We could.
I was just starting to get on a roll.
I know. And now I'm cutting you short. Maybe we'll do another come back in the future and hot seat you guys again.
I was just getting the butterflies out.
I know. Did you know though? I'm going to give you one more random piece of information.
Shoot.
Did you know that Jagger told me last night that he would like to be interviewed on the podcast?
That'd actually be a pretty good...
would be cute. Our 17-year-old mentioned, he's like, I got an idea for your podcast. And I was like, yeah, what's that? And he's like, I mean, if you want to, you could interview me.
That'd actually be a pretty good
interview. And
at
first I kind of was like, I didn't brush him off, but I kind of just laughed to it. And then I was like, you know what? That actually would be pretty great, is having Jagger's perspective on things. So I think we're going to do a little teenager interview coming up.
Because that's a great era. Like, he's 17, he's making decisions in life, whether to be a farmer or to be a construction worker or to be whatever.
Stick in the family business or not.
It'd be interesting to see his thought process. Like, what's he thinking about when he's like, oh, do I want to go feed another cow or do pigs or so on and so forth? Or does he just want to hang up the keys at the end of a 9-to-5 job?
Yeah. And the funny thing is, I was helping him with his homework the other day, and he had like an essay written in there.
Yeah.
And it talked about the farm.
Oh.
And it said, sometimes it can be overwhelming.
Oh, for sure.
So it was just interesting to be able to see that, like, his perspective in an essay to his teacher. And then I was like flipping through something else, and the teacher had written her notes about an assignment that was due and said something along the lines of, I know you do lots of work on the farm.
Yeah.
So if you need some extra help on this, let me know.
Aww.
Which I just thought was so nice of the teacher. So anyways, I'm really interested in having Jagger on the episode as well. So thank you to you for coming out and chatting with me.
Anytime.
We really appreciate it. And I know that there's a lot of our listeners who will really appreciate your insights into the importance of social media from somebody who really didn't like social media and probably wishes he still had his iPhone 4 had he not run over it with the tractor.
I love an iPhone 4.
Yeah.
Yeah. If I could get in there one of those, I'd be all over that.
I love it. Thank you so much for coming out, Jay.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you for listening to this episode. We know there are only so many hours in the day, so we're honored you choose to spend some of your time with us. If you're one of the many rural women entrepreneurs who are struggling to find true community and step-by-step support that actually moves the needle in your business, join our signature group coaching program, the Workhorse Collective. You can find more information in the show notes of today's episode.
Together, we've set out to support and connect with women in rural business. If you found this episode valuable, we'd love it if you'd share with another woman in your circle. It would also be incredibly helpful if you would take a moment to leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes, and we'll catch you next time on the Workhorse Podcast.